When I was a girl, my goal was to be a radio actress because I realized I wasn't a dolly for the movies, and radio was very big in Chicago. I didn't think I would have the courage to go to New York on my own, but I had studied and prepared myself, and I felt that that was a very sensible goal. And I had really been prepared. When I was between my sophomore and junior year in college, I begged my folks to let me stay in Chicago one summer to see if I could get some radio work. I stayed at the Three Arts Club, that wonderful big red brick building on the corner of Goethe and Dearborn, Greek Revival. It was like a women's hotel, because in those days, this was the mid-40s, girls didn't live outside of their parents' home unless they were tramps. So young women came from all over the Midwest who were studying art, music, dance, and lived at this Three Arts Club. When I went in the summer, there were very few young women there because they all went home for the summer. Their courses had a summer break. The only people who were there were, who I felt were old. They might have been 35 or 40 teachers who came for advanced studies. It was successful in as far as I landed a few radio jobs. Radio was very popular in the drama in Chicago. We had lots of radio dramas, not soap operas, real dramas. And it was the hub of commercials. Actors were so busy that when the bridge would go up on Michigan Avenue, they couldn't get from CBS at the Wrigley Building to NBC in the Merchandise Mart fast enough because they were so heavily booked. It was easier to get auditions in those days and to be heard. Well, I landed a few jobs. One of them was a commercial and a couple of radio dramas. But I was so lonely because you have to figure that this was the mid-40s. The little rooms were not air-conditioned, and it was hot. I was on an upper floor, and I would lie on my little bed, looking at my little table and my little chair in this cramped room, thinking, oh, if I could only go out and get a cold drink or an ice cream soda. But the only places that sold those things were on Division Street, where all the bars were. And if a young woman was walking down the street, unescorted, it was assumed she was soliciting. You didn't dare go into one of those establishments. You didn't even dare be seen alone on the street. So I stayed in my hot little room at night, dreaming of going. Sometimes I'd take a walk up and down Dearborn and look at the beautiful old townhouses that most of them were still there, and imagine the parties that were going on and the rich people who lived there. And it was refreshing in a way for my spirit. So I felt I could have a start. While I was still in Waukegan, and my first child was an infant, a radio station opened up, a local radio station, WKRS. And I went to see them. Of course, first I had to learn how to drive. I wasn't driving yet. And this place was out on the highway. So I got driving lessons from my husband and practiced in the afternoons by myself. I would take the baby and wrap her in blankets and lay her on the floor in the back of the car, figuring if anything happened to me, who would take care of the baby? So I kept her with me and practiced going in and out of the driveway and around the block. And finally, I knew I could get to the radio station on my own. And they gave me time to have my daily show, a women's program, if you please, which they don't do nowadays. It was called Social Lines from Hines, which was named after Heinz, the department store that sponsored the show. We took news off of the ticker, women's news, and I interviewed people in Waukegan who were important, who would interest women's activities, women's club, women who were running for office, professors at the Lake Forest College, and we were able to fill a daily show, and they hired a young woman to write the scripts. I was very happy doing that. Take my little baby to the sitters every morning, and I'd be home by noon, so I could still continue my housewifely duties. So that gave me the courage that that's how I was going to start in Chicago. I would do voiceover work. Well, I finally reached the time in my liberation that I wondered if I could do acting anymore in a communal sense, like on a stage, because all the years that I was a housewife, I did accept engagements at sisterhoods, women's clubs, synagogue forums, to do my one-woman shows, which were adaptations of Broadway shows, and I did all the characters, which we learned how to do at Northwestern. It was called interpretive theater, and now they call it performance art, chamber theater, but it was done, and I was successful at it. I had actually gone to auditions that they used to have for entertainers for women's clubs at Fullerton Hall at the Art Institute. A lovely Winnetka woman who heard me one time said, "You should go to those auditions, Roz. You'd get a lot of bookings." And I did. In fact, there was an agent who was watching the auditions who wanted to book me all over the country. And I said, no, I wouldn't go anywhere unless I could be home that night. Where did I get the idea that I could never be home, but never be anywhere at night except home? But those were the restrictions that society and my own upbringing brought to me. You don't leave your husband and children to be out somewhere else. So he booked me anywhere I could fly in and fly home that night. I'd never been on a plane before. This was so exciting and interesting. And when I'd get to the town, which could be Omaha, Nebraska, Green Bay, Wisconsin, they met me as if a star was coming to town. Well, that's what I did when I was a housewife. But I felt, can I get back to acting, not giving myself my own cues? Because you get into bad habits. If you want to laugh in a certain line, you give yourself the setup before. So I joined a workshop. It was the only one in town. Ted Liss's workshop for actors. We did scene work. We did scenes with each other. And there were talented actors there who were doing television work, because television was now big. And I learned a lot, and I found that, indeed, acting is like riding a bicycle. It comes back to you. From then on, I felt, with the encouragement of my peers, that I should start taking auditions. One could find out what the theater schedule would be for a certain theater, what their plans would be for the following year. And if you thought that you could do any of those roles, you asked for an audition. And you sometimes were successful. There weren't a lot of places to work in Chicago at that time. The off-loop movement hadn't started yet, but it was beginning. The first off-loop North Side theater that was professional was the Body Politic, now they're out of business, and Victory Gardens. After that, they began to sprout up all over the North Side, and now all over the city. We now have 230 producing companies, most of them non-equity. That means not belonging to the theater union, but a place where young actors can come and get a resume and be cast in roles that will give them the confidence to go out into professional theater later. Well, all this was happening, and I was eager to be a part of the movement. There was a group of friends who were doing a workshop play, that is, a low-budget production, hoping that agents would come to see them. I was in that show. I was cast, and one of the top agents in Chicago, the top at that time, Shirley Hamilton, was in the audience, and she invited me to come to her office, and maybe she could do something for me. Well, what a thrilling experience that was. She took me on. They told me how to get professional pictures made and a voice tape, and it was a several $100 investment, but you had to have it. And I prepared myself that way. And sure enough, I began getting little jobs here and there. But this was not while I was in Waukegan. I had to wait till Highland Park before I could make the commute and could afford to do this, to afford help in the house so I could get away. Well, that's what I was doing threefold, trying to work 3 jobs at once. And thank God I had the health and stamina to do it. By the time my youngest child was married, I gave my ultimatum notice. I said, Sam, I'm retiring. I've had 13 years in the store. You're well established. And if you close the ladies' department, I don't care.